Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Athlete's Voices. I'm your host, Andrea, and today we are tackling a complex subject, which is testosterone testing in women's sport. Before starting, I would like to say that I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, and so all the science I'm giving you is simplified for my own understanding and yours. If any scientist, doctor listen to the podcast and want to add details, feel free to do so in the comment section on YouTube. I am aware that this topic is controversial, and for this reason I would like to ask you to listen to the full extent of the episode and to be respectful in the comment section if you decide to comment. Now that that's been said, let's dive into the history of testosterone testing, what it means, what it is, and why is it so controversial. In the 19th century, Pierre de Coubertin invented our modern version of the Olympics. When he invented that, he thought of it as a competition that would bring men together. He never thought about women. The problem is, as I've explained in many episodes, women always participated in sports even when they were not allowed to do so. And so at some point, he and the Olympic Committee had to let women enter the games, and thus was created the separation games between men and women in various sports. Although at the time, de Coubertin believed it was a simple thing to create categories, he rapidly saw that it wasn't as simple. Basically, some of the women showing up to the sports were not aligned with his own definition of what a woman is supposed to be. Some of those women were deemed too strong or too fast or too competitive. And that's when sex testing began. Since then, female athletes have been going through many tests to prove that they are women. Tests have changed throughout the years and have been revised many times. And honestly, the rules are extremely confusing for coaches, athletes, and everyone in general. If we look at the past Olympic Games in athletics, for example, which is usually the area where there's the most controversies about sex testing, we've seen women being disqualified or even prohibited to run in this kind of competitions. There was, for example, Dutee Chand, an Indian sprinter who in 2016 became the best woman sprinter in India, and the first Indian woman in decades to race the 100 meters at the Olympics. But she almost didn't make it because World Athletics, which is the governing bodies for track and field events, stated that she could not compete in women's events because of high levels of testosterone in her body. Chand disputed the idea that her testosterone levels made her more like a male sprinter than a female one, and in 2015, the Court of Arbitration for Sports agreed with her. It determined that World Athletics had not presented enough scientific evidence to defend its claim, and Chand could run again, which led her to going to the Olympics a year later. Another example that comes to mind is Christine Boma, a Namibian sprinter. At the age of 18, she won a silver medal in the 200 meters at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, which made her the first ever Namibian woman to win women's Olympic medal and breaking the world under 20 record. For the Tokyo Olympics, Although she was allowed to compete in the 200-meter race, she was not allowed to do so for the 400-meter. The reason for that was that World Athletics rules require that athletes with certain DSDs participating in women's running events from 400 meters to 1 mile cannot have blood testosterone levels above 5 nanomoles of testosterone per liter of blood. And Christine had been tested just like all the other athletes in July before the Olympics, and her testosterone levels were higher than the World Athletics threshold. And I could honestly give other examples in track and field or even other sports. More recently, during the Paris Olympic, you've probably heard about all the controversy surrounding Iman Khalif, the Algerian boxer who won the gold medal. But to keep the episode short, I'm not going to explain every single situation. I mentioned the term DSD, and you might wondering what they are. So let me explain a little about biology. So DSD means disorder of sexual development. There's a long list of DSDs, but not all of them have the same importance. So for example, a woman with PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome, can be allowed to compete in events. But a woman with high testosterone levels, which is also a DSD, wouldn't be allowed. And the reason for this difference is that it is believed that higher testosterone provides a competitive edge. For example, in the specific case of Christine Mboma, World Athletics rules at the time meant that because of her testosterone levels, she could not compete for the 400 meters, but she could for the 200 meters. In other words, she could no longer run what is considered middle distance, but could run shorter ones. As I said earlier, rules often change, and in 2023, World Athletics decided to reduce the testosterone level threshold to 2.5 nanomoles per liter of blood across all events. In the case of Christine, she can no longer run at any event because of this change. Editing Andrea here. I'm pausing the episode to update you on something that came up last month, so March 2025. World Athletics has approved the introduction of a test to determine if athletes are biologically female, and that's only for female competitions, as you might understand. So basically, it will be a cheek swab test that will determine if the SRY gene is present. The SRY gene is part of the Y chromosome and causes male characteristics to develop. So that's what they announced. They hoping to put that in place in September of this year for the championships in Tokyo. And the idea would be to test female athletes only once in their career just to make sure they're female. And now going back to the episode. And this change now leads her to two choices. She can give up on elite sports or take medication to lower her testosterone levels. Now let's spin that for a second. I'll talk about medication in more details later. Right now, I want to go back to the idea that higher levels of testosterone give a competitive edge to athletes. Is that even true? Going back to biology, in our society, our genetics determine our gender. So chromosomes XY mean it's a boy, and chromosomes XX mean it's a girl. But in reality, it's not exactly that easy. You see, anatomy, genes, and hormones are different things that make up who we are. Some people with XX chromosomes might have a penis and testicles, and someone with XY chromosomes might have a vagina. These people are considered intersex, and they were just born like that. Now, if you look at hormones, some men naturally don't make any testosterone at all. And on the other hand, some women have naturally a lot of it. So if you take genes, anatomy, and hormones all together, you realize that biology is way more complex than it seems. There's not only one biological factor that makes a woman and a man, because all these variations and possibilities in human biology. It's hard to know exactly how many people have these variations, but some scientists suggest that it's around 1 to 2% of the global population, which is still not the norm, but it doesn't mean that those people don't exist. And at the end of the day, governing bodies in sports have the power to decide who can compete in women's and who can compete in men's events. And for them, it's a question of fairness. I would point out though that it's only women who are going through those testosterone tests, not men. Which begs the question, are testosterone levels really that important? If they give such a big advantage, why is it not important for male athletes to be tested in the first place? When we go back to historical reasons for implementing sex testing, we realize that it wasn't really for fairness among women athletes. For example, in 1968, the International Olympic Committee implemented sex testing in order to mitigate anxieties at the time that the Soviet male athletes would compete as females just to increase the communist medal count. And also, they implemented this sex testing to relax older and more cultural worries of masculinization of women in sports. Before testosterone testing, sex testing and chromosome testing were used. Many women were disqualified because they passed the sex but didn't have XX chromosomes. This contradiction, the invasiveness of some testing, and the social consequences for the athletes who failed those tests eventually led to the International Olympic Committee to abandon sex testing in the 1990s. But of course, the IOC's concern about ensuring the apparent fairness of women's competition did not disappear, and it reserved for itself the option to test people on a case-by-case basis. That's why now sex testing is not focused on chromosomes but on testosterone levels too. It's also important to note that athletes have been using artificial testosterone since at least the 1950s in the hopes of improving their performance. But before testosterone testing became a thing, governing bodies never checked these. But if testosterone taken illegally and testosterone produced naturally had the same impact on all bodies, we would assume that male typical levels of testosterone would necessarily confer a male typical athletic advantage. But the science shows that, at least among elite athletes, the link between testosterone and athletic performance is far from straightforward. Interestingly too, when governing bodies talk about testosterone levels giving an advantage, they usually cite two large-scale studies conducted in 2014, designed to measure the hormonal profile of elite athletes. But these studies yield somewhat conflicting results, according to scientists. When you actually go through those studies, you realize that the authors conclude that hormonal profiles of elite athletes differ from the usual reference range, which it's not that surprising, and that the International Olympic Committee's definition of a woman as one who has a normal testosterone level is untenable. And despite the plausible speculation that elite athlete women would demonstrate higher testosterone level than their non-athlete counterparts, this hypothesis was not even confirmed in the data. So should testosterone even be considered at all? Well, the controversy over whether or not natural testosterone levels provide a competitive edge is far from over. But scientists agree that testosterone should not necessarily be the focal point of attention in designing fairness in sports, because human biology is far too complicated to be represented in a single criterion. Many studies have shown over and over again that there is no evidence to show that athletes with higher levels of testosterone perform significantly better than those with lower levels. And I will leave some resources for you to read if you are interested in the scientific studies I've used for my research, because I know this topic is complex and it's important to understand the complexities of that, and I couldn't put all the complexities of it in this episode. Now, I want to go back to the example I gave of Christine Momba and athletes like her who find themselves in a situation where they have to choose between going through medication or even surgery sometimes to keep competing or abandoning their careers as athletes. Sex hormones such as testosterone or estrogen are made by the ovaries and the testicles, which are also called gonads. In some cases, athletes might have internal testicles, which creates the testosterone. If that is the case, they can go through surgery to get rid of this organ, but this is a permanent change, and these athletes will be on replacement therapy for the rest of their life. That being said, this is not the case for most athletes, and thus they only have the other option, which is using medication to lower the levels of testosterone in their body. According to scientists, it takes a minimum of 6 months to make sure that athletes with high levels of testosterone have reduced them enough that the results will let them participate in sports. On top of that, there are many side effects to this medication, such as increase in blood clots, fatigue, mood changes. Most doctors actually agree to say that this medication should not be prescribed if someone doesn't want to take it or if someone doesn't even need it in the first place. On top of that, the World Medical Association, WMA, has come out against World Athletics to say, and I quote, "The WMA opposes World Athletic rules requiring female athletes with differences in sex development to take drugs to reduce and maintain the natural level of blood testosterone in order to compete." The mere existence of a condition caused by a difference in sex development in a person who has not expressed a desire to change that condition does not constitute a medical indication for treatment. Medical treatment solely to alter athletic performance is unethical. End of the quote. And when we think about it, if there's many women who might be intersex or have higher levels of testosterone competing in sports, why should that be an issue? Did the IOC disqualify the American swimmer Michael Phelps in every event he won because researchers have found that Phelps produces half the lactic acid of his competitors and thus recovers faster than any of them? No, of course not. Looking at the history of these regulations and at the complexity of human biology, I think we can all agree that testosterone testing is not the best option nor an answer to ensure that women's sports are fair. Governing bodies have to find other ways to do that, and they should not only find the solutions with the scientists, but I believe also with the athletes themselves. And that's the end of my episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, share it with your friends. I'll see you in the next one. Let's keep learning with the athletes' voices.